Welcome to Steve and Dave's 50 years ago this month. This is our first episode from the year 2022. So we're going to be looking at January 1972. By the way, Steve,
yes,
I don't know if you're aware of this, but this is our third January session for this show. So we're starting our third year.
Well, that's awesome. Yes, and I think it would be hard to argue that this January 72, it's a classic. I mean, much in the way that almost all of 1971 was just an amazing year in popular music. 72 won't disappoint either. So
right, absolutely correct.
So it's mid-January. We're going to do the chart from January 15th, 1972. And so at the top of the charts in the United States in mid-January was, of course, American Pie, parts 1 and 2 from Don McLean, which we've talked about before, but you got a quick word about American Pie.
Oh, well, it was a huge song for me. One of the first songs that I anxiously waited for on the radio when it came, and incredibly long for a hit of its size. It's incredible that they even issued it as a single. But yeah, a classic, and it will remain, I think, a cultural milestone going forward by a guy that by all accounts is just not very nice.
Well, I don't know about that, but I've heard similar things, but it's a song that it's obviously it's in a way it's rooted to this era, right? Because it's describing the day the music died and sort of the cult, and also the kind of cultural milieu, late 60s, early 70s. But there is a kind of timeless quality to it because it almost comes across as a kind of fable. And so it's an interesting song. I think it will be hard for people to hang on to the meaning. You know, there was a kind of cottage industry surrounding sort of interpreting the song and jumping Jack Flash and all that. But Jack Flash jumped on a candlestick. I'll get it right. But right. It's so I think that will fade over time. But I do think that there's something about the song that is important and lasting. So we have American Pie at number 1. At number 2, we have Melanie's Brand New Key. Quick word about that. We talked about that. I guess that was last month, but Brand New Key.
Just a delightful, fun song by a delightful, fun singer. What's not to love?
There we go. Yeah, I think that sums it up. It's really sort of Melanie's calling card, for better or worse. And so it's at number 2. All right, at number 3 in mid-January 1972 is an amazing song from the great Al Green, and it's his "Let's Stay Together."
Let's Stay Together from his 1972 album of the same name. The single was released in 71 already, but the album wasn't released until 1972. It was his 4th album. It was produced and recorded by Willie Mitchell at his Royal Recording Studio in Memphis, kind of a classic studio. Mixed by Mitchell and by the engineering and producing legend Terry Manning, who was also working for Stax Records in Memphis at that time. And it became the first of 6 Green albums to peak at number 1 on the Soul album chart. And this time around, it claimed the position for 10 weeks. The single reached number 1, peaked at number 1 and on the Billboard Hot 100, and it stayed on the chart for 16 weeks. Also topped Billboard's R&B chart for 9 weeks. Billboard ranked it as the number 11 song of 1972 on the pop chart, but it also went on to claim the number 1 position of the year-end R&B song for 1972. So had a great year, a very big year, and of course continues to be a well-loved song. Absolutely. Ranked number 60th greatest song of all time by Rolling Stone in their 2004 list of the 500 greatest songs. And it's been covered by numerous other artists, including Tina Turner and Barack Obama.
There you go. From soup to nuts, yes. Barack Obama. I did not know that. Awesome. It's Al Green is it's a magical performer, one of the great performers of all time. His voice is soul music. His voice is the 1970s, and this song is amazing, and it holds up so well 50 years later. It's a timeless aspect.
Yeah, it's sublime. It really is.
Yeah, it's fantastic stuff. So we have Al Green, the great Al Green, at number 3 with "Let's Stay Together." At number 4, it's and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think this is the soul hit from Jonathan Edwards, but this is number 4. It's "Sunshine" from Jonathan Edwards.
Yeah, essentially, it's his. He was a one-hit wonder, right? And he had his hit with this quintessential "Angry Young Man" song.
Yeah.
It's from his debut album, Jonathan Edwards, and it wasn't even originally planned for release, but the song that they were going to put out as a single,
Really,
inadvertently got erased by the engineer. The master got erased at near the end of the sessions.
Oh, perfect.
And so they had to fill that gap with the song, and I think it's probably fortunate.
Wow. Oh yeah.
For Jonathan Edwards in the end. It was released as a single. It first gained some popularity on Boston radio, kind of a local thing, before going nationwide. And this is the gist of this, the feel of this is clearly protest song. This is an angry young man, and he doesn't have any patience for the people, for the man who's trying to tell him how to live. And so it was also seen as part of the larger protest. Regarding its success, Edwards said, quote, "It was just at the time of the Vietnam War and Nixon. It was looking bad out there. That song meant a lot to a lot of people during that time, especially me," end quote.
Yeah.
So it's just worth mentioning on this song, Edwards had vocal, he played the guitar, he played the bass, and he played the harp. So
there you go. It's when you think about the context, the kind of the political and social context, things did look bad out there, and it's easy to lose sight of that all that 50 years later. But the Vietnam War is still rolling, even with the Vietnamization of the war. You still have tens of thousands of American troops in Southeast Asia. He mentions Nixon, and the quote you there. President Nixon is gearing up for a campaign run in a second term. 72 is an election year. There is a certain kind of darkness that surrounds the country. The glow of the 60s is well behind us. Yeah, it's
the irony
you can see
the angry young men all stay home on election day.
Well, that's right. For sure. Yeah, I mean, largely I think that's been the case for a long time, right? It's but it's the song. I mean, I think it's a song that people hear now and they very much associate with that era. I mean, it's, for better or worse, it is the song that sort of, emblematic in a way of the early 70s.
Well, for a song that's really really pissed off, it cheers me up every time I hear it. I think it's a bouncy, sunny song, and I love it. I love the attitude. So every time I hear it on the radio, I'm just like, oh yeah. So
it's the bounciest angry song ever of all time, maybe. Yeah, because if you just extract the words, it's like, I'm gonna choke someone. But yeah, there's a certain kind of, energy to it for sure. So there we have Jonathan Edwards with his Sunshine. At number 5 then is, it's Sly and the Family Stone with Family Affair, which we've talked about some in an earlier show, but just a couple, Dave got a couple words about Family Affair here.
Well, talking about angry young men, Sly Stone certainly was one of them by this point. And a lot of the optimism and a lot of his early vision for the family Stone had given way to a much darker vision. Of course, there were other things going on in his life, heavy drug use and things like this. But yes, Family Affair, a song that sounds like maybe it's an optimistic sort of song, turns out to be actually fairly dark and pessimistic.
That's right. I mean, it comes from, I mean, I think it's a pretty, in its own way, a pretty bleak album. And it is, that's the demise of Sly Stone is just, it's just bathed in sadness. It's just, there's just no getting away from it. It's a
But
tragic thing.
this was arguably his swan song. And
I think that's right.
He went out on a high note. A very powerful album and a powerful song. So
there we go. So Family Affairs at number 5. At number 6 then is an instrumental number from Dennis Coffey and the Detroit Guitar Band, and it's a song entitled Scorpio. And it's it's a song that peaks at 6. Coffey had was part of the Funk Brothers. He was out of Detroit and he played with those at Motown. I mean, Coffey is the guitarist and he's on everything in this era. You name it, he's played on it.
Just widely sought bassist because he was a genius. He was just fantastic.
It's an really interesting story in that Coffey was a white performer. He's a white performer, and he struck gold with Scorpio, and he also had a year later this year, another hit, Taurus. But he played on Soul Train, and Soul Train is this weekly show that features almost exclusively Black performers. It was a great show. But Coffey was reportedly the first white artist to perform on Soul Train, which is quite interesting in a way, and I think an important kind of mark of distinction for him in a sort of way. It is also the era, Dave, you'd agree, it's also the era where instrumentals really can catch the ear of the public, and that in the early 70s, whether it's it's Billy Preston or a whole host of the idea of an instrumental hit, they're on the charts all the time.
Right.
All the time.
It wasn't nearly as unusual as it would be today.
For sure. So there we have the number 6 Scorpio from Dennis Coffey and the Detroit Guitar Band. Okay, so at number 7, all right. So at number 7, we have the New Seekers with their version of "I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing" in perfect harmony. Then we should add, also in mid-January 1972, at 13, we have the Hillside Singers with their version of "I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing." Okay,
people just couldn't get enough of that song.
Good boy, I guess not. So the "I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing" in perfect harmony was a familiar tune in the heads of virtually everyone on planet Earth, because it was an ad campaign. It was a jingle used by Coca-Cola, and it was a part of a huge ad push in the early 1970s. And in the Coca-Cola ad, in addition to the song, you had then young people from around the world, multi-ethnic kind of gathering on a hilltop, I think on a hilltop in Italy or something like that. There's a kind of, so everybody knows the song, at least can hum the song. And so there is an effort to then put the song out on the radio. And the Hillside Singers were primarily a group of background singers who worked in the ad business. They were unavailable. So the New Seekers got first crack at the song. Now, the New Seekers were a group that were put together by Keith Putker, who was a member of the Seekers. Now, the Seekers might sound familiar in that they had a monster hit. They were an Australian group, and they had a monster hit called Georgie Girl.
Yeah.
And the Seekers really were quite popular in the early and mid 60s. They ended in 68, and Putker then reformed a group in the early 1970s. And the New Seekers they had some modest success in the United States, apart from "I Like to Teach the World to Sing." They look at what I've done to this song, Ma, the Melanie song.
Another Melanie song.
Yeah, they peaked at 14, and they also did their version of Pinball Wizard "See Me, Feel Me" a couple years later, which peaked at 29. So the New Seekers had a fair amount of chart success.
Wow.
Whereas the Hillside Singers, this was sort of their one claim to fame. Coca-Cola got a lot of mileage, out of all of this. And Coca-Cola reportedly then, very generously, of course, right, gave up their take of the song royalties and donated them to UNICEF and all of that. But this was, I don't know, this is a song that had, sort of a life of its own. It was heard, choirs across the world for the next several years sang it, children's choir, high school choir, church choir. This was the kind of thing that people would sing around the campfire. "I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing" in perfect harmony became, it was everywhere.
Well, this is one of the examples of commercial culture looking to the appealing part of the counterculture.
That's right.
And there certainly were. They had bright clothes. They were happy, funny people. They had beautiful people with long hair running around. So they recognize if we can sanitize the counterculture a bit, we can use it to sell product, right?
Right.
And that's what happened. And this is a perfect example of that, the absolute epitome. And Pepsi was going for it too, right? It's a Pepsi generation.
Pepsi generation.
Going strong. So it was a battle to get that market segment.
It's hard not to be cynical when "I Like to Teach the World to Sing." When you hear it, when you see it, it's like, oh, come on. But there are the embers, right? In 72, there are the embers of the counterculture. There are the embers of this kind of 60s generation. There are the embers of this idea that, in fact, we could work together. The world is, in fact, a small place. And that we do, there's a lot more in common in all of this. And that maybe just by the act of, singing and having a Coke or something, it's extraordinarily naive. But yet there is something, it's hard not to, there's some hope here. And it's completely understandable on some level why people just sort of wrap their arms around this. That this just, it gave people a sense, a kind of bounce, a kind of lift, a sense of optimism in a pretty dark era.
Do you are you familiar with the I think it's a Coke commercial with one of the Kardashian girls, where there is kind of a riot-like thing going on down on the street, and the police are coming in, and there's a police line, and she goes down and joins the protesters, and then crosses over to the police line and gives one of the cops a Coke. And it's the same, it's clear that they're going for the same type of vibe.
Absolutely.
But it's also clear it's not working on any level whatsoever. And that commercial just got panned from here to the end of time, right? But this one that we're talking about did not get panned. It was really well loved.
No, it really was well loved.
Itself was
it's
very,
considered, it's considered a classic in the advertising world. And I think it's the kind of, and the "I Like to Teach the World to Sing" ad campaign was, it was not only successful, but it was almost became archetypal. right? That it tapped into images and ideas that that other ad campaigns tried to use. It just really tugged at the heartstrings in a way that most ad campaigns don't. And again, I know it's Coca-Cola, but it was enormously effective.
Yeah,
enormously effective. So
as is witnessed by the fact that it places twice in the top 20 in January 1972.
So there we go. I like to teach the world to sing. At number 8 is Michael Jackson with "Got to Be There," which we talked about in the last show. I believe we talked about it in the last show, but it just Michael Jackson. He's a solo. I mean, he's a solo artist now for sure. What would you say? I mean, what do we need to know about the early Michael Jackson? What is it about the early Michael Jackson that it's so appealing?
Well, we're going to be talking about Donny Osmond in just a bit, and in a way, Michael Jackson was the prototype for that type of pop star. Young, attractive, wholesome, but with some legitimate pop chops. He could really sell a song, right?
Absolutely.
And so it was kind of inevitable that both of these guys who started out in family groups quickly became the focus of attention. Not only were they the lead singers for most of the songs that the family did, but they were also clearly what was drawing every eye, and they were the ones getting covers on Tiger Beat and
this is the thing,
things like this. So it was inevitable that was going to happen, that he was going to go solo. He had more luck with a couple other things going forward, but what the hell, this is top 10. So
that's right.
Really
that's right
about that, right?
You can't. And so it's clear that with both Michael Jackson and Donny Osmond, who we'll get to in just a second, they have they've been in front for only a year, maybe even less than a year. But it's clear that their fame has surpassed that of their brothers, and that they will soon be seen as essentially kind of solo artists who have a backup group of brothers. And it's all taking shape here in late 71 and early 1972. So to that point, then you've got at number 9, then the aforementioned Donny Osmond with "Hey Girl" and "I Knew You When."
All right, and since we're talking about just the how incredibly successful these very young men are, we'll point out that "Hey Girl" came from Donny Osmond's third album, his third studio album, "Portrait of Donny." It was released previous to the album being released. But this song, it was released in 1971. The album wasn't released until 72. But it peaked at number 9, certified gold in July of 72. And the album reached number 6 on the Billboard top LP charts, also in July. The other hit from this album was "Puppy Love," the Paul Anka song. And that reached number 3. So, long story short, the album certified gold at the end of 72, making it his third gold album.
It's unbelievable.
All 3 of his solo albums went gold. And when that happened, Donny Osmond was 14 years old.
It's just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable,
yeah. This was actually kind of a double A-side single.
Yeah, that's right.
"Hey Girl" was one of the songs that was written and composed by Goffin and King. The second hit that Donny Osmond had with one of their recycled songs. This one had been a hit in 1963 with Freddie Scott. And this is one of the things about Donny Osmond. Almost all of his stuff was recycled, right? They were almost all covers.
Oh, that's right.
almost exclusively.
Yes, that's right.
But he took these things and reinterpreted them for a generation of prepubescent girls, and it was clearly a recipe to success. Interestingly enough, although I Knew You When, which was the B-side, was on a different album. It came from his second solo album, To You With Love, Donny. And his first two solo albums, do you happen to know who produced those?
Well, it wasn't Wes Farrell, was it? Oh,
Wes Farrell was busy. He was a very busy man.
Busy with the Partridge Family.
Yes.
I don't. Well, should I know?
I think it's going to surprise you.
Oh Lord, it probably will. Then go ahead.
It was Rick Hall.
Oh my God! Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah.
So Rick Hall. So Rick Hall of Muscle Shoals Fame Studios,
Shoals, Alabama, Fame Studios, and he produced their one Bad Apple, the big Osmond hit that made them huge. Produced their first, the first Osmond album, and he produced Donny's first two. He was named by Billboard the best producer of 1971.
Sure.
Among others, because he was making the Osmonds and Donny Osmond huge with his productions. So, even though Hey Girl came from his third studio album, which was not produced by Hall, the single was produced by Hall. So, two different albums. And Hall produced the second one, and not the third one, but he produced both of the songs on the single. So I Know You When was written by Joe South.
Sure, the famed Joe South, yeah.
Famous Joe South, and it became a popular hit in 1965 with Billy Joe Royal. And
Down in the Boondocks, Billy Joe Royal, yes.
Yes. Also, someone with a very loyal following.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so, again,
well,
Donny sings it. It becomes a hit again, and later on, Linda Ronstadt would also cover this, right?
That's really the production piece of it is really interesting, given the Osmonds' desire to be taken seriously, not to be seen as a kind of novelty family act. And if you have Rick Hall producing albums and singles, I mean that's as good as it gets in this era.
Yeah, interestingly, it's 1971 is when he won this distinction, the best producer of the year. But the Swampers had left his employ already in 1969.
That's right.
So he was already on his third group of studio artists, and was still just going balls out.
Right. Well, Rick.
Incredible.
Rick Hall was a genius. And actually, I think not to be a smart ass, but it speaks to Rick Hall's genius that he can make the Osmonds and Donny Osmond in particular appealing. But it says something about Hall that he would take on that he had lots of options in terms of people to produce. He was at this point in his career, he was able to pick and choose. And the fact that he hitched his wagon with the Osmonds in this regard is it's an interesting choice. And really, I think the Osmonds would serve well by it. And certainly Donny Osmond was served well by it.
Well, Donny's first solo single, the Roy Orbison cover. The title is just this.
Yeah, I can't think of it either, but yeah.
That was written by Rick Hall.
That's right. Yeah.
So
the level of fame that Donny Osmond in particular reached at such a tender age. Again, it is kind of miraculous that he's still here, you know, that he survived that.
Oh, and he is one of the real survivors. Just never had the breakdown, the addiction stories or any of that. It seems like the family really gave him some sort of foundation.
Sure, I think
that
that's
allowed,
right. Yeah,
allowed him to go for it, and he's still a cultural icon, even today, and continues to be. He's on Broadway. He's on television. He's still going strong, you know, and he's still making
sure.
music and still trying to make a mark that's not bubblegum pop. Even today, worked with people like Peter Gabriel and so on and so forth. I'm really impressed. You know, I think you have to really look at that and say, wow, well, you know, somebody
your admiration for Donny Osmond knows no bounds. I mean, there's no question about that. But well, it is impressive. It is
grown
impressive
over the years. I was not a big not a huge Osmond fan back in the day. Donny was one of the staples of like Tiger Beat magazine.
Well, sure.
And I was a Tiger Beat guy. I know that sounds like an oxymoron.
No, it doesn't. But anyway,
it was a magazine for young girls. But I see it as kind of being the gateway drug to Rolling Stone for me. That's what.
I see. That's a very generous interpretation of the influence of Tiger Beat. But yes, so first Tiger Beat.
But I was never, you know, Bobby Sherman, David Cassidy guy. Donny Osmond was not.
I just recall this era, just going into the classroom when people would have their notebooks and just a sea of Donny Osmond pictures on the girls in my class's notebooks. I mean, just like every desk, there was, you know, there he was again. You know, the people would open their locker and there'd be pictures of Donny Osmond and lockers.
But if you were a guy and had any of that, that was a recipe to just getting the shit kicked out of you.
There was no doubt that there was that Osmonds were not cool. They just weren't, and there was no street cred in being an Osmond fan or a Donny Osmond fan. There just wasn't, and I'm pretty sure that rubbed the Osmonds the wrong way.
Oh yeah, it did.
I'm pretty sure it rubbed them, really got to them. But it is. I mean, it's hard to overstate the influence of Donny Osmond and the Osmonds in the early 1970s. Donny Osmond specifically, and Michael Jackson as well. I mean, these are enormous performers that are, as you're suggesting, you don't just hear them on the radio all the time, but their faces they're on TV, they're on magazine covers, they're on lunch boxes and notebooks and posters. I mean, it's just everywhere.
Yeah,
they're just everywhere. Okay, so at number 10, then we have Betty Wright's Cleanup Woman, and Betty Wright, who just passed away last 2020. This is clearly her biggest song. It peaked at number 6 on the pop charts. It is a song ostensibly about a woman who, describing a woman who gets a lot of loving from men who have been left by other women, that she is able to sort of clean up. And
kind of the female equivalent of Handyman by James Taylor.
There is that. I mean, I think that's right. And the protagonist of the song, there is some kind of jealousy regarding the cleanup woman, and there's this kind of bit of a kind of grudging admiration for the cleanup woman as well. It is an acknowledgement, right, that there's opportunity to be found, in this way. And it's actually, you know, it's kind of an interesting song. It's it recorded at the famed Criterion Studios in Miami, but it definitely has a kind of Muscle Shoals sound to it, a kind of a Swampers sound to it. Very much of the time. It also has just hints, maybe just a hint of reggae, which would have been in the air at that point, and certainly been influential in Southern Florida. Betty Wright had a long career and she performed really right up into her passing. Many of her songs had been sampled over the years, and she was seen as a kind of grande dame of soul music, and really was really, I think, beloved is not overstated. She never had enormous pop success. She had a bit more success on the R&B charts, but I think she was just seen as a woman of incredible substance and talent, and also a very generous spirit. And I think she's just one of those people that her influence in music circles was far larger than her chart success would suggest. And she was a big deal, and this was by far her biggest song. Very interesting woman, kind of a little interesting song too. So you've got Cleanup Woman at number 10 from the late Betty Wright. Let's cherry pick a little bit, Dave, from the rest of the top 40, maybe just slightly beyond.
Okay.
You've got at number 30, you've got this singer-songwriter, I guess is fair, from England, a young lad named Elton John, and it's the song Levon at number 30.
Right. Elton John has been around now for a little while, and has been cranking out some hits for a while. This was from his fourth studio album,
Right.
Madman Across the Water, written, as most of his material was, by himself, composing the music, and Bernie Toppin doing the lyrics. This one is a little bit different, a bit of a departure in that it had an orchestra in the background, playing the music. That was arranged and directed by Paul Buckmaster.
That's right.
This peaked at number 24 on the US Billboard Hot 100, peaked at number 6 in Canada. According to the producer, Gus Dudgeon, Toppin was inspired by the band's co-founder, Levon Helms, to name the song after him. Apparently the band was like their favorite, John and Toppin's favorite group at that time. But if you listen to the lyrics, Levon is not an admirable character, right?
Not so much, no.
He's just kind of a two-dimensional capitalist guy who uses his son for child labor, and really not the sort of person you're looking up to. And Toppin later said it had nothing to do. It was completely unrelated to Helm, which makes a lot more sense because, again, this is not a song that you dedicate to someone you admire.
No, absolutely not. It's a couple things about that, Dave, in terms of where this comes from. And Elton John had his career started as a bit of a slow burn. I mean, I think it's fair to say that he didn't take the music world by storm. I mean, he had a very successful introduction to the United States at the time at the Troubadour, right, in LA. That was very, very meaningful. But in terms of like moving a lot of albums or a lot of singles, that doesn't really happen right away. And so it's just right now, late 71, early 72, it's just starting to happen for him. And so I've always thought that that's kind of interesting, that there is a fair amount of the Elton John catalog to explore before you get to the big hits, right? That there are albums and singles that are only relatively successful. And I would include this as one of that's relatively successful.
Right. It made no impact on me at all at the time. I was not familiar. I did not hear Levon until I got Elton John's Greatest Hits Volume 2.
Volume 2. Yeah, this is right. This speaks to where, so Levon is one of those songs that for people who know John and who love Elton John, this is an incredible song, but it's just below, right? So there would be songs that everybody could know and love and sing and hum and that kind of thing. This is just below that. But I think this is, this is an incredible number, and it speaks to, I think you talked about Toppin. I mean, this is one of his more, it's complex lyric. There's a lot to dig into there, and it really speaks to the idea that there is a certain, well, there's a real depth to John's music at this time, and that's really aided by Toppin's lyrics. I mean, it's a really important song, I think. Really important song.
Yes.
There we go. Yeah.
Well, and to the hits that he's had so far, I think your song was the big blockbuster up until now. But yeah, as you said, the hasn't had any of his other really big hits yet.
I mean, right. I think it's fair to say that the Elton John hasn't really become Elton John yet in January of '72. That explosion
break into the top 20, right? So
right. Right.
Yeah.
It's so we're going to get to talk because Elton, so 72 is a big year for Elton John.
He's about ready to explode. Yeah.
About ready to explode. That's exactly right. So speaking of exploding, there is no band bigger than the band at number 33. And that's Led Zeppelin with Black Dog at 33. We've talked about Led Zeppelin before as a singles band in the United States, which doesn't mean much. This particular song peaked at 15, but Led Zeppelin was the biggest band in the world in 72. We're about a month removed from the release of Led Zeppelin 4, the Sozo album, which I think by many measures is, if not the greatest album of all time, it's certainly in the conversation for the greatest album of all time. And Black Dog, again, kind of comes from that. Dave, I've mentioned your thoughts about Zeppelin 4 and about Black Dog. I mean, and Zeppelin at this time. What does Zeppelin mean if it's early 72?
Well, it's amazing because this is a band that's flying in the face of all conventional wisdom about how you market music, right?
Yeah. That's exactly right.
And FM radio has a lot to do with the fact that that this particular way of doing things, it's album-oriented rock. They almost make it difficult to release and market singles as a band. That's not what they're doing. That's not where they want to go. But in spite of all that, as you say, they become hugely successful, and yeah, it is kind of amazing. Personally, Led Zeppelin 4 is my favorite. I think a lot of Led Zeppelin fans,
oh sure,
are not going to be on board with that,
right? But
I think it's their best work.
Well, I think I would agree. I mean, and I would agree that I think many Led Zeppelin fans would not see it that way. But if I share your opinion about Led Zeppelin 4. I'd say Black Dog is not one of my favorite songs on Led Zeppelin 4, that they're, whether it's Battle Evermore or even Misty Mountain Hop, which is the B side of this. I mean, there are lots of songs I like on Zepp 4 other than Black Dog. But Black Dog is, it's interesting. You have kind of curious time signature. You've got call and response. You've got an a cappella version. You've got some echo effect. It's drawn from, it has origins as a kind of blues song. It's it's a big song for them, and it's very much a kind of a song that's very much associated with them, and it's immediate. You hear the first 5 seconds of Black Dog, it's, oh yeah, here we go. But I can think of songs that I'd rather hear Zepp play than Black Dog.
Well, if we're talking about Led Zeppelin 4, we have to mention, of course, Stairway to Heaven, which becomes their absolute signature piece. And is regularly mentioned in lists of like the top 10 rock songs of all time.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, sort of, it becomes kind of the national anthem for classic rock. But if we're going to talk about Led Zeppelin 4, then we also have to mention the Battle of Evermore, where Robert Plant shares vocal duties with Sandy Denny. I think that's the only time that a woman appears, on the vocals on the Zepp album. It's so there's a lot. I mean, we're not breaking new ground here.
Yeah, what's not to love?
What's Not the Love? Yeah. Led Zeppelin 4 is a landmark LP, and Black Dog, of course, is drawn from it. So a couple more from the outer reaches of the charts in mid-September or mid-January 72. Boy, I talk about a band that I love this band. It's at 35, it's Faces with Stay With Me. Classic rock.
Yeah, classic rock, classic misogyny.
That's true too.
Oh man.
Oh yeah.
Okay, Stay With Me. Written by Rod Stewart and Ronnie Wood. It was on their 71 album, A Nod Is As Good As a Wink to a Blind Horse.
Blind Horse, yeah.
And yeah, it's fun to listen to. It's a good rocky song. As long as you can somehow ignore the lyrics, which are just so misogynist. The lyrics describe a woman named Rita who has a face that is, quote, nothing to laugh about, end quote, with whom Rod Stewart wants to have a one-night stand as long as she is gone when he wakes up.
So,
wow. All right.
Yeah,
you know,
there we go.
That's putting it out there. That's in your face. So you know what you have. I'm sure that that's where Rod Stewart was emotionally back in 1971.
One thinks that might be the case. The Faces were in a transition at this point, right? The Faces are born from the Small Faces, a British act of the mid to late 60s, an act of some note in Great Britain. They were much bigger than England than they were in the United States, but they did have some chart success in the United States. Right, Steve Marriott leaves the Small Faces, and Ron Wood and Rod Stewart join the newly constituted Faces. Rod Stewart is now, right, he's on the rocket ship to stardom. Oftentimes they are billed Rod Stewart in the Faces. Rod Stewart will quickly after this leave the Faces for solo stardom, and but during their moment in the sun, the Faces in the early 70s, particularly for 3 albums, this band rocks, and it's also just debauchery on steroids. The stories of the Faces on the road are just legendary, and how they interacted with fans. There have been cases of champagne, and they have the fans come back with them to the hotel. I mean, like all the fans. I mean, it's just really, it did seem as though those 5 guys are having more fun, maybe put fun in quotes, than anybody at this point for those years. There's something good natured about the Faces, but I mean, the misogyny it's hard to ignore. I mean,
if you're talking about debauchery and that sort of thing, since we just talked about Zeppelin,
well, there we go.
I think you have to say the Faces had serious competition.
They were still working on it. Yeah. Well, it's clearly the era of debauchery on the rock scene, but few could keep up with Zeppelin and the Faces. So speaking of debauchery, at number 40 is the grand old man of debauchery, perhaps, and that's Jerry Lee Lewis,
the Killer.
At number 40, it's his version of Chris Christopherson's "Me and Bobby McGee." Now, this is as high as the song goes. We know the song. We talked about it. Janis Joplin, of course, made it famous. It's really, I think, the song that made Janis Joplin's career in many ways. And Chris Christopherson is the songwriter and performer and actor of great note. And we've talked about Christopherson before. We haven't really had an opportunity to talk about Jerry Lee Lewis, in part because his star had really faded by the early 1970s. This is the last song that Jerry Lee Lewis will put in the top 40, pop top 40. And again, it only peaks at 40. It is the case, though, that Jerry Lee Lewis was he's a founder of rock and roll.
The pioneer.
Yeah. And he he set a template not only on stage but kind of off stage. And so Jerry Lee Lewis famously, right, lived a fairly undisciplined life, and incidents involving alcohol and other substances, as well as then an ill-fated marriage to a, I think, 13-year-old cousin. But Jerry Lee Lewis was the killer, and there is a kind of spirit to Jerry Lee Lewis that was, it clearly was infectious. If you see scenes of Jerry Lee Lewis performing in the 50s, for example, it's mind-blowing.
It really is incredible, and that his audiences got their minds blown. It was like an alien, nothing they'd ever seen before.
That's exactly right. And when you pair like Jerry Lee Lewis with the Little Richard, it's just like there are sort of moments where you just try to sort of take it all in. What that would have been like to be a teenager in like 1958 or something like, and to see these people in person, it really must have felt
mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing.
Really mind-blowing.
Really world expanding. And so it's Jerry Lee Lewis had his share of hits in the late 50s. And he became, a fixture on the oldies circuit for decades. But I think he's a really important part of the history of popular music and of rock and roll. There's just no getting around it. And while this is, this is his swan song essentially at me and Bobby McGee, he definitely had a role to play.
For me, there's a handful of Jerry Lee Lewis hits that you have to have. So it's not like I think he has a huge catalog. It's just that what he was putting out there, when he was putting it out, it was just so incredibly different and new from anything that had existed before, that that's what makes him so important.
I think that's right. I think that's well said. So there we have Jerry Lee Lewis at number 40 with his version of Chris Christopherson's Me and Bobby McGee. Last song we want to talk about today is a theme song to a television show that is reshaping kind of the television landscape. And I don't think that's overstated. And so,
not at all.
So at number 44 in mid-January 1972 is the theme to All in the Family. Those Were the Days, sung by Carrol O'Connor and Gene Stapleton as the Bunkers. Right.
And the song was written by Lee Adams and Charles Strauss. These two were responsible for Bye Bye Birdie. And later Strauss would go on to write the music for Annie. But this is just a song about looking back in nostalgia at a simpler time.
That's right.
And especially in the version that we see on the show, it's even a fairly harmless reminiscing, a fairly harmless type of nostalgia.
I think that's fair.
It doesn't really get into any of the edgy, but boy, today is shit, the sort of stuff that this hit from on Atlantic Records. It's expanded. The lyrics have a couple stanzas that are not on the opening theme of the show, and a couple of the lines are, let's say, not necessarily kind. And I'm just going to quote them because I was not familiar with them.
Yes.
People seem to be content. $50 paid the rent. Freaks were in a circus tent.
That's right.
Those were the days. Take a little Sunday spin. Go to watch the Dodgers win. Have yourself a dandy day that costs you under a fin. And it's $20, right?
I think that's right.
So
yeah,
hair was short and skirts were long.
Short.
Kate Smith really sold the song. I don't know just what went wrong. Those were the
Well,
days.
yeah.
So those are the additional stanzas for that.
And those additional stanzas, which I think is an important addition here, they do reflect some of the vitriol and the venom and that the show was full of.
Right.
The part of the theme that's shown before All in the Family, there is a real, I mean, it's very sweet and like you're suggesting, very kind of harmless, kind of reminiscing, and it's charming. There's a real disconnect between that and the show. I mean, they have like almost nothing. I mean, it's really, I mean, you actually sort of can throw your arms around Archie Bunker, or when you hear him sing the song on the show, and he's less lovable when the show starts.
But what we're looking at here is I think it reflects his worldview.
I think that's right.
But
yes,
but in a much more innocent way. You're
That's
looking
right.
at someone who basically thinks that the world went to hell after 1959. Right?
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, I think that's largely it, and that there's really almost nothing redeeming about the world circa early 70s. I mean, it's just all gone to it's just all gone to hell, and it's the show was really important, and it really changed. I mean, it changed television, and it changed the kinds of it expanded the boundaries that television could
absolutely.
push.
Yeah, it absolutely did.
Yeah, and
talk about
groundbreaking.
racism, about homosexuality, about the war. All these things that you don't discuss in polite company, much less thematized on a television show.
I have to say that, and we've visited about this before, and I think anybody who's familiar with the show knows it's quite shocking. Those first couple of years of the show are so raw that it really takes you aback. The language, the topics, just the general tenor of the show. It's very angry, and it's the kind of thing that you wouldn't get on network television today. Some of the language and whatnot used. It's really, but if you want to get a sense of the zeitgeist of the early 70s in the United States, that's really a great place to start. I mean, what did it feel like to live in the United States in the early 1970s? Well, watch a couple episodes of All in the Family.
Well, it's amazing that it became a hit.
That's right. Yes,
it really is. But it was a huge hit, and it led the Nielsen ratings for like 5 years in a row.
Big deal.
Just really huge. And I think the reason for that is you could watch that show and think, oh, yeah, Archie just dissed the liberals again. He just
there's that.
Really
I think that's right.
Or you can say, Mike put Archie in his place again. So
there we go.
Either way, you had someone to identify with.
Yeah, there's something. Yeah, somebody to root for. Somebody to identify with. It's it was a long time ago, but there are sort of moments along the way that really need to be acknowledged. And I think it's unfortunate. I think All in the Family has disappeared a little bit from sort of the cultural radar. But this was an enormous moment culturally in the United States. I don't think there's any getting around it. I think that what Norman Lear did, putting that show, what CBS did, quite frankly, putting on that show, it was a landmark. And so it's
and just the writing. They were walking such a tightrope there. And they had to make it funny. The fact that it worked, that it nearly always worked, is just amazing.
Yeah,
it's a level of television writing that we very, very rarely see.
It's a tour de force on almost every level, and it is. It's one of those things that I mentioned a second ago. I just think it bears examination, because it reveals so much about life in this era that it's like a really important time capsule. It's fascinating stuff. So I think it's going to be I think it's going to be a great year, Dave. I think that 1972 is going to be an amazing year to think about in terms of music and culture and certainly politics, because of course this is an election
year.
And it's also, I wanted to mention, we'll talk about this soon. It's also an Olympic year. And the Olympics in the 70s were an enormously important event or set of events because this is Munich. Yeah, so this is Munich Olympics, which we'll get to later in this year. So a lot to talk about. And so Dave, you want to just tell our loyal viewers what they need to pay attention to as we close shop?
If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you did. Give us a thumbs up. Maybe make some comments down below. We'd love to hear what you think of the show.
Yes.
You can check out, subscribe right here if you have not done that yet. You can check out some other episodes of 50 Years Ago This Month right up here. Right. And very important, our playlist for this month can be found right here. You got it. That's right. Sure, check that out. It's great for stuff. Sure. Yeah, it's great stuff. And as always, remember, Stephen Daves is on Twitter. Stephen Daves1. We're on Twitter. So thanks everybody, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.